ahead and introduce the thing?
All right, no, thank you so much for joining us today for Masters on Masters, our new talk show that we hope to do in the future more often. And this is a show about the creative process of storytelling, where two great talents, I hope, dig a little deeper when it comes to imagination, creativity, structure, and character development. And I have the honor to sit virtually now between two masterminds. And I will definitely let Paul do the work. I can relax, sit back, and hopefully learn. And so can our audience. So thank you again for joining us. And the next 45 minutes or so belong to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this, Mark. When you, this originally began when you asked me if I could contact Beau because we wanted to honor him. You wanted to honor him at the Berlin TV Series Festival, and that was what was supposed to be happening this summer. As the first recipient of that very prestigious award, and you know, what happened was COVID, which changed a lot of people's plans. So we're going to have a chat this year, and hopefully we'll get a chance to honor Beau in person next year in Berlin. That would be really lovely for us and for a lot of human beings who want to start getting together again.
That would be terrific, yes.
We will see. But anyways, so welcome, Beau. We're not going to introduce you. Other than the fact that you're an incredible writer and have been one whose work I've been watching for a long time. And you know, we won't get into. I mean, there's so many things we could discuss that are not about writing, but it's also your leadership of the Writers Guild of America East has been terrific, and we thank you for that service, plus what you've been doing, just putting yourself in the streets every week, you know, for the Black Lives Matter movement is incredibly admirable as well. So those things we're not going to talk about unless it comes back in somehow, but I wanted to start by just saying thanks for being here, Beau.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Mark, and to all of your colleagues in Berlin for organizing this. It's really great. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of your festival and certainly of Paul's. And I had the great fortune to have a few conversations along the way in this life with Paul, but never in front of a bunch of strangers online and in this sort of very focused way. So this is exciting for me, and I'm eager to jump in and start talking about art.
Terrific. Well, let's start. I mean, you and I took very different paths to getting to where we are. And we had a brief conversation the other day about that. And I remember when I started following you on Instagram and I saw what I thought was just, I don't know, someone else's art that you were championing or something. You were posting these amazing pieces of art and that you had been creating on television sets and paintings, but I didn't know you'd been creating them. I honest to God thought, oh, this is your wife or this is somebody you're promoting, but that's really what you wanted to start out to do. You wanted to be a fine artist. That's sort of how this all started for you, right?
Yeah, my mom was and still is a pretty capable visual artist, and she actually wanted to go to the Cleveland Art Institute when she graduated from high school. Didn't have the money to pay for it. There were no scholarships at that time, so she started working in the world, married my dad, and life took her on a certain path. But I got some of those genes, so I was drawing and painting since before I could read or write. So my introduction to art is started visual, and I guess in many ways remained visual. I think I told you on the phone that when I'm writing, I'm really trying to record what I see, not what I hear. And you'll hear from a lot of writers that they're sort of, it's what they hear. And to me, obviously dialogue and what people are saying is part of that picture, but it always actually starts with the image. And yeah, I sort of stumbled into writing mostly as an escape from painting. And what I liked about it is that it forced a kind of discipline and rigor that the natural facility of painting, I was oftentimes, I think, in it, sort of skating past. I could make a painting that might impress people, but didn't really have any substance to it. So I was just pumping out things, and writing, which I really have to work hard for because I don't have, I think, a natural talent for it, forced a discipline and commitment a lot of my paintings didn't. And you know, fast forward a couple decades and here I am. But paintings remain near and dear to my heart and something that I do on a regular basis. And you can see some of it behind me. I've been working on a quarantine series of
which I love. Yeah.
These are old monitors from the 80s
Wow.
that I spray painted on the surface of the glass, and then the way the drawings are done is that I scrape in with X-Acto knives or box cutters into the dried paint, and then you can turn those monitors on, and so there's a negative image, like almost like celluloid negative image of those drawings as well. And yeah, then you know I work a lot in oils. This one's 8 feet tall actually, so it gives you a sense of scale.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, it's a nice antidote at times from writing, because the sort of writing you and I do, Paul, you know, is alone for the initial stages, just you and the work. But then you start working with all your collaborators, which is a blessing and amazing. But it's a process of giving away, you know, of letting go. And I think it benefits from that because all of these people's talent arrives at a bigger collective vision. But there's a purity to painting, which is that it's just you and the work, and when you're done with it, it's done. You know?
It's interesting you say that. First of all, a few interesting things you said there. One, the fact that early on, at least, you didn't value in some way your natural gifts as much as you valued those that were harder won and harder earned. So painting, as you said, you could just knock out something and impress, while writing, you had to really work very, very hard to get to that same level. So you valued it more, which is interesting what we say about humans in that way, because it is a very human thing. And now, of course, that you see the collaborative effort that, as you very nicely put it, you know, is really a wonderful experience. Everybody coming together to make a whole. But at the same time, when you aren't all on the same page, so to speak, it can be just one of the worst things ever when you're working with a director or a producer or someone else who just sees things totally different than you do. It can be incredibly frustrating, which might make you now appreciate your canvases more, because you can only have to argue with the tube of paint and the canvas. It was fascinating also, you talked about the way you see things, and most writers, you're right. I tend to see something and write it down. If my characters are walking around, they're walking around, and they're walking around in a set, and there's a face on that character, and that character is saying things or leaving the room, and if I want him or her to come back in the room, I have to sort of force them to come back and ask them questions and things. It is very visual for me, as much as it also, you know, I have to structure, etc. And so I've always really admired writers like David Simon, who I was blessed to work with, who it is about the words, and it starts with journalism with him, and his, you know, and sense of politics, which I know you have as well, but his sort of journalistic training, which was all about a word, all the way through. And so working with him, and I was very blessed to do that on Show Me a Hero, working with him, he was focused on, you know, he'd be watching behind the monitor, there with me every day, and very collaborative, but he's listening and he's watching the script, you know, and that's what he's focused on, because through that comes the truth for him.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. I watch the monitor, or I even look past the monitor at the actors directly as though they're on a stage. You know, and I started out on the writing side in the theater, and one of my my first real teacher was the great Cuban American playwright Eduardo Machado, and he had been a protege of Maria Irene Fornes, who approached things more almost like from an actor's standpoint. You know, like,
where was this?
In New York. This was for when I was in grad school. As an undergrad, I studied visual arts and history, and I only took one film class ever with Annette Insdorf about it was her course on the French New Wave, and I took it mostly because I thought it'd be easy credits. I get to show up each week and watch a movie, and I'll write a paper and get credits for it. But Eduardo, he would use a lot of Maria's exercises, and one of them was that, you know, before you even started writing, to imagine an actual theater that you've been in, a real stage that you were familiar with. So you're looking at that in your mind's eye. So you're already seeing it as a play. And then, you know, as the characters start to come into that space, that you're just a stenographer, and what you're recording is not just what they say, but what they're doing. You know, and so much of the theater is dialogue driven because you don't have a lot of the bells and whistles of mise en scène and special effects and all that. You have a static frame. But one thing that he always really hit upon was that what we're doing is mapping behavior, right? And dialogue is one version of behavior.
Part of behavior, yeah.
Right? But most of our behavior, in fact, is not dialogue driven. And in the theater, you have to find a way to explore that behavior through dialogue because it's your primary tool. In film, you have a lot more options available to you. But I've always thought about it that way, which is dialogue is a byproduct of behavior. I think of like the great Harold Pinter, and I'm going to butcher his quote here, but essentially what he says is that, you know, language is a way to obscure the truth, that we often use it to avoid or to mislead ourselves and others, and that the real truth is in between the lines or in conflict with the lines. So you're seeing language not necessarily as a harbinger of truth, but as its enemy. And it's
interesting you say that, because I've said the same thing so many times, and I've said it not as well and or as precisely, because I talk about the fact that all characters constantly lie, and human beings constantly lie, but I don't mean that in some nefarious way. It's just that we have a whole language of not telling the truth to each other, even though in intimacy. We say, I think someone said, I love reading about these, and some psychologist was talking about the fact that every person lies, every human being lies 8 times a day, and the most common lie is, I'm okay. And it's just the fact that we do. Behavior is what will always betray us. Will always tell us who character is, what they do, and it's the small things, as you say, or it's the larger actions, which means we want to know how a character is going to act in a certain way. You might have the hero, or as an example I've given before, you could have a crowded movie theater, well, post-COVID, have a crowded movie theater, and you see all the characters ahead of time. You see the jock, you know, the good-looking young guy. You see the young nerd, or whatever these stereotypes you're putting in here. You see this person, that person. You see a dozen of them, and you know that there's a fire in the basement, and it's gonna, and you know that they just dumped a load of trash outside the back door for the you know the entrance, or the emergency exit is now blocked, and things our characters don't know, and you know that something's going out front that's going to stop people. And so when that room bursts into flame or covers in smoke, the question I always like to ask is, who is going to be the one who's going to save everybody? Is it the guy who looks like the hero? Is it the guy who can think faster because he's got glasses or whatever? Is he that guy? No, it's not those guys. It's the woman who's pregnant for the first time at 39 and is in the front row and is uncomfortable. She's the one who's going to organize everybody. She's the one who's going to be the savior. It's not ever who we expect. It's always a surprise. But if you heard those people talking ahead of time, the great looking big buff guy was going to be talking like what the things he say are going to sound heroic. The things he's going to say to himself and to us are going to convince us that man is our hero. That man's our protagonist, when it's not. So I find that fascinating, constantly fascinating, that language itself can't be trusted in the theater and probably in life. But I mean, hopefully we all endeavor to tell the truth. But in theater especially, it's exactly as you say, when a character comes on, it's those small gestures, those small pieces of behavior, whether they're on the stage or whether they're in a cinema or in television, that are going to tell us what the character's really thinking. When they say, yes, I love you, or they say, I hate you. You know, what is the, you know, what's behind that?
That's why I tend to look at the monitor at the actors, because yes, you can close your eyes and you can listen and as to whether what you're hearing sounds true, right? And not necessarily the words that are being said, but how they're being said. But there's so many other things to pay attention to. You know, you can tell often whether the scene's working by looking at a character's hands. You look at hands and mouths, like these sort of lizard brain things that we're places where we express ourselves. Like if I'm on the subway train, I'll look at someone sitting there, but I'll look at their hands and their mouth, and I'll be able to get a sense of where they're coming from, what they're feeling.
Why their mouth?
Why they're not saying, well, I mean, these our hands and our mouths from just a pure, I mean, I'm no sociologist, but they're directly linked to survival. You know, they go to our core lizard brain needs of, you know, of staying alive. You know, like you need your hands to have tools and pick berries and kill the elk, and your mouth is literally what you use to sustain yourself. You know, and then our communication with others probably started from a place of yelling, you know, the bear is coming. Like it's very prime. So we are betraying our masks often with our hands and our mouths, even though our sort of frontal cortex is saying whatever we need to say. Your body language, and those are two like extreme aspects of your body language, is saying something completely else. So it's worth paying attention to that. And I'm not precious about the words. Like you know, I see, I mean, plays are often seen more as like, you know, you can write with an eye to literature. Like you can read a Chekhov play as literature. You don't necessarily have to see the production or Shakespeare. And screenplays not as much. Maybe 100 years from now, people will look at them as literature. I don't know. It's a relatively new art form in the big scheme of things. But I simply see them as a blueprint, a roadmap to give actors and directors and crew like a starting place to do something interesting. And if they're not able to do something interesting, that's often a shortcoming in the script. You know, like if they're talented people who know what they're doing. So then if you're watching, you might pick up on something or see something that you adjust the text, or you go, you know what, I don't need those 3 lines. Their body is saying it all for me, and that's more interesting.
It's so great when an actor does that. I've had that experience with, you know, I remember Charlize in The Valley of Ella, had come to me on several points and go, Paul, this dialogue, really good. I don't need it. You know, I really don't need it. Let me do it with a look. Yeah, I go, sure. She would do more in that one look. Sorry, go ahead.
Actors of the stars like want more lines, but actually the best ones want fewer lines.
Yeah.
They want the fewest words, and they're going to do the most with the fewest words.
And she would.
You can do that particularly on film because you have that close up. Unlike the theater, where you often need those lines because someone's sitting, you know, 100 yards away, and needs to hear, you know, and that goes back to the Greeks, where they barely moved at all, and it was all language because you're trying to reach 40,000 people outdoors while the birds are chirping, and they can't. You're this small to them, so it was all the voice. So as we've moved towards cinema, I think we've found a lot of new strategies to be able to track and map this behavior. And you know, Fincher said something to me interesting, which I remind myself all the time, which is this basic equation that drama is behavior over time. What we're seeing is how someone's behavior changes over time, and that's the story, that's the journey, that's the arc. And
that's interesting.
What makes for interesting drama is when you expose all of these sort of contradictory behaviors within someone over time. But what I always start with is I'm starting to develop a story is, what does my characters need? What is the thing they need more than anything in the world? And it's not like they need a job or they need a divorce or they need $50,000 by Friday or the mob's going to kill them. It's deeper needs, like they need validation or they need love or they need peace or they need forgiveness. And if that's their one truth, there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. You could be someone who needs validation, right? And you have a bunch of, you know, bad apple friends who want you to shoot up that heroin, right? And in that milieu, your validation comes from like, yeah, let's go on this path together and like do these drugs and get high. And you're validated in that environment. But because of your addiction, that starts really fucking up your home life, and you lose your spouse and your children disown you. And as a result of that, the validation you're so desperately seeking as you know, a responsible and loving family member goes away. So in one strategy to seek validation, you actually destroy your actual path to validation. And then you're like, okay, I got to kick the habit because I need to get my kids and my spouse back, right?
It's so interesting. There's so many ways.
So, I mean, just to finish the thought, like the need remains constant, but the behavior over time, and therefore the drama, changes as one runs into internal and external conflicts of trying to fill that need. And then, of course, as you add more characters, each of them have their own needs. And those needs are often in conflict with one another. You know, but I always, if all tributaries lead back to the basic fundamental need of that character, then you start to get into all the complexities and contradictory natures of human behavior.
How did you discover that truth?
That goes back to Eduardo as well, which is he would literally do exercise, and this came from the great Maria Irene Fornes, you know, very much about getting in your body. Think of what your character's need is. And then actually find the place in their body where that lives. Is it in their neck? You know, is it in their spleen? Is it in their knee? And then travel into the blood vessels and the sinew and the molecular structure of where that's actually living, and then put it in your body. This sounds very like New Age or whatever, but
no,
it's a way to get into your physical body. And I think that's so important. So much of bad writing, and I'm guilty of this all the time, is cerebral. You're trying to like move the Jenga pieces around, and I need to get from A to B to C, when actually so much of our lives are driven by our body and sort of the fact that right now I have the air conditioner on in here because it's a hot day and I'm worried whether my sound is messed up. So then I'm projecting more, right? Which is very superficial. This doesn't get to whatever my fundamental need is, but already I'm beginning to map, like, what does this scene look like for me?
Yeah.
Right? Now, when I'm really stuck in a scene, I'm not sure what to do, I'll often go to very simple things. Like, did the person just eat, or have they not eaten today? Is it cold or is it hot? You know, do they actually have like a chronic pain somewhere? You know, and they're looking, even trying to find the right chair in the room as they're sitting down to the meeting might be an interesting little bit of flavor that like completely changes the dynamics of the geography of that meeting. So if I'm stuck, I'll just go to the body and say, what does that offer me? You know?
And do you tie that back to their need, or you just say, you know what, it's hot?
Well, it's, you know, this starts to become second nature, this sort of thinking. So, you know, the person who needs validation, I might have decided also has a knee problem, right? And when she is standing up, her knee really bothers her, right? And so, you know, this person might be going to visit, I'm just making this up right now, but might be visiting their sponsor on their path to recovery. And they decide to meet in a park. And there's only one bench, and there's an old lady sitting there feeding the pigeons. And my character desperately wants to sit down because her knee is bothering her. So while the sponsor is trying to give her wisdom and advice, all she's really thinking about is my knee, and how do I get this old lady out of this bench? And these pigeons are driving me crazy. And now, because I'm frustrated because I can't actually achieve what I'm trying to do right now, which is to fulfill my need, get advice from my sponsor on how to be on a path to recovery, I find myself getting angry and frustrated, and I lash out at this old lady. You know, why are you feeding all these pigeons? You want to, they're shooting all
not the truth, not the truth. It's complete.
It's complete. My sponsor's like, what the hell is going on? I don't want to be around you in this toxic environment. You know, you're berating an old lady. Like, call me when you're ready to talk. Who has no notion.
All she was guilty of, in the truth, was not being able to admit that she was in pain.
That's right. And then now my sponsor has said, come back and talk to me when you're actually in a place to talk. I feel bad about the old lady. And now maybe I call up my dealer and I score. And it all started because I have a bum knee.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. And it's much, I love the way you came at that, which was much more indirect. And you got to something very human and very quickly. With I tend to go a little more direct from need, and I often get trapped in it. For example, when you were giving that example, the first before you got outside, you said, okay, somebody's there, and they are trying to, they have a need to be validated. They have that need to be loved or validated, whatever it is. And so I said, okay, a person comes into a room, and you said heat. So I said, okay, need to be validated. They've dressed in some way to impress this person. They put in a jacket and a tie. But so they get to this place not realizing the air conditioning has just gone out, right? So it's too hot. But they're trying to impress, so they're not going to say anything. And this is going on. They're not going to. The guy says, "Take your jacket off." Go, no, I'm fine. And then it's sweat starting to come down. They're trying to hide that and that. But that's more direct, and it gets to the need. But it doesn't get to the old lady, which I love. You know what I'm saying? Is it doesn't bring in. So if you tend to approach it the way you just did, by knowing what the need is, but then just ignoring it for a second and saying, okay, that need's still going to be there, that need. But okay, what's going on? The knee hurts, and then how do you get from that knee hurt? It's just a decision to say the knee hurts. It could have been anything, but you chose that. And you chose the fact that, okay, you know how to do these things. You know that there has to be a barrier. You know that she's going to want to sit, and then you know that the only bench is going to be taken, and that bench is going to be taken by not some guy that you can go walk over with, but an old lady. So it's like it makes it much, much worse. You have to keep making the situation so much worse for your protagonist. Everything has to add up to being, and it's this moment that they really want the validation of their sponsor, like and they really want that. So it's like I love the way you did that.
The need is what gets you to the park, right? But now I've royally fucked that up.
Yeah.
And not every action that a character takes is fulfilling their need. It is somehow it's either direct. I'm trying to fulfill my need. I'm showing up in the suit. I want to impress. Or it's direct that I'm showing up to meet my sponsor to talk, because I'm trying to fulfill my need. But then when I fuck it all up, it's a reminder. Like if I look back at this 10 years later with some therapy, I'm like, I had a bad knee and I lashed out at an old lady, and that's human and that's okay, right? But in that moment, I feel like I've completely fucked everything up. And so now what I do is I go and I score, right? Yeah. Which is directly the opposite of fulfilling my need for validation, right? Yeah. But what am I doing? The pathway to being validated, which requires real work and struggle, is so painful and hard that sometimes, like now in reaction to that need, I need to escape from it. Like it's too present. It's too hard. So now I'm going to try to erase it for the few hours that I'm high. Yeah. But it's all in reaction. It's all orbiting around this central need. And of course, people have multiple needs, and needs change and evolve over time. And you don't want to be too reductive, but it's a great place to start. And then typically when I rewrite, I go through all the scenes with my major characters, and I say, in what way am I pushing the story of their need forward in this scene? Yeah. And not every single scene does that. Sometimes they're more of a supporting role, and we're really focusing on someone else's need. But in the best scenes, you have several characters whose needs are all present and in conflict with one another, and everyone is right.
Yeah, always. That's the best. That's your villain. That's what I love about villains. The various is finding a way to make your antagonist completely right about everything, and that doesn't matter. I mean, the hardest one I had to do was in a television show, and it was a law show, and I decided the episode that week. It was a family law. They were in fact representing a man whose wife was alcoholic, clearly disturbed, and it was a custody battle between this guy who looked like a pretty darn good guy, and this this wife who was just kind of wacko, and they had a young daughter, and they were fighting over this 13 or 14-year-old daughter's custody. And so what I decided to do was say, okay, I'm going to make him a pedophile, and no one knows. He's molesting his daughter, and nobody knows. And so I'm going to give my problem to my protagonist. At some point, he confesses. Okay, your problem is she can't betray the trust. She cannot just go to the police and go, I'm sorry, I've got a guy who's, who's abusing his daughter. If he was about to do so, but he's saying, no, I'll never do it again, lying, of course, that's a crime that's about to be committed, but a crime that he has committed, she's stuck. There's nothing she can do. She has to continue to fight for custody for a guy that she pretty much knows is going to, even though he swears he's not going to, is going to abuse that woman, that girl in the future, and that girl won't say anything to support the fact, and there's no way you can get this out. So that's a great start. The trouble, I had to then take myself, I had to put myself, which is the weirdest thing I ever did, put myself into the mind of a pedophile and say, okay, how is that right? How is my lifestyle, what I do, my actions, how is that right? How is that a gift? And it's like, it's so creepy to put yourself into these situations and into that head and go, because every person believes they are right. Every person in their mind, no matter how villainous, no matter how heinous, believes they're right. And the more you can prove that point, the more villainous those characters become.
Yeah,
the more you objectify them, the less real they are, and therefore the easier to judge them. It makes the drama that much weaker. So in doing that, I mean, that was really the worst thing I ever had to do as a writer.
Yeah, I think it's important to draw a distinction, though, that it's in saying everyone is right. It doesn't mean that someone who's doing monstrous things is objectively right. And of course, one of the
you have to have the point of view of the show, the point of view of the viewer. But the point of view of the character is one that in that Hitler, whatever it is, obviously, whoever it is, that moment can justify that heinous behavior.
Yeah, well, and that person who's doing those things might not even think what they're doing is right. They may be conflicted.
They may not.
But really, I guess what I meant that everyone is right is that everyone is, and this comes back to the need. Whatever that need is that person is trying to fulfill, someone could be someone needs love, right? Now, the way that two different people are trying to fulfill the need for love, one can be saintly and the other can be monstrous. But if need is genuine and true, then that means the behavior is genuine and true, as monstrous as it may be. And in that respect, I guess you could say the character is right. Not right ethically, not right morally, but insofar as
legally, nothing. No, it's just in their head
that the behavior is true, and the tragedy is that oftentimes people in fiction and in real life are trying to fulfill their needs in ways that do incredible damage and harm to themselves.
That's exactly right. And if we can understand that, and that's the one thing you give me, if we can understand the character's motivation and their pure motivation, which then has caused them through whatever imbalances in their mind or in their character or in their sort of ethical or moral morass of a world in which they think that's okay. If they are acting out through that, but if we can get back and say, what is the truth of their need? Then we can understand that person. We should still judge them. We should still say, oh my God, that's monstrous and that person needs to be killed, stopped, whatever, because that makes us active as audience, and it also makes us human beings. But it makes the drama that much richer to understand which each of those people, and that's whether they're all sitting around trying to give somebody advice about what to do, about whether they should go back to the 12-step program or they should forget, whatever, just advice about that, because it all comes from their point of view. Or it's about, you've got your villain and your superhero, and you have to be engaged in both those things. And the more you can take that villain and that hero and see what their true needs are that are driving them to be in conflict, the richer the drama. But it sometimes does take a toll on the writer.
Well, I wanted to ask you, when we spoke a little while ago, I actually wasn't aware of this, and I was fascinated to hear it. So moving from drama to comedy for a moment, although, all comedy is drama and all drama is comedy. You started out in the sitcom world. 3
Yeah.
camera, 1 set, like, which I find so intimidating because I think I described it to you on the phone. Like I see it as a haiku or a sonnet. There's all these rules. You've got like a rigid 22 minutes. Usually there's like an emphasis on trying to have a joke every 3 lines. You know you have this very confined space, and here's your set of characters. You might be able to introduce a guest appearance or 2, but it's you have so few tools available to you, which all can be, I think, you know, probably really hard, but also liberating in some ways because sort of. And I'm just curious what that experience was like for you, and maybe how it's found its way into some of your later writing.
I did love it it's because I did come from theater originally, not the way you did. I didn't go, I barely made it through high school. I started writing, I was drawing little comic strips and things and reading characters. When I was quite young, I couldn't draw, but I would do them because I loved Mad Magazine and those kinds of things when I was a kid. And so always knew that I wanted to work somewhere in storytelling, but I didn't know what. And I had a feeling that and theater was the closest thing in Canada, in this small town in Canada, to that goal. And so I wrote some of the worst plays and reviews and things ever to beat on a stage, not just in Canada, but any place in the world. And that's just not my opinion. I'm not being humble. I have reviews to back that up. And so was basically thrown out of the country for that, or at least they didn't argue when I left Canada for Hollywood, and then stumbled my way. You know, I was very young. I was 22. I knew nobody. I was married, and we had a baby like just a year after we got there. We both came down from Canada, and I was working and trying to, with knowing nobody, trying to break my way into this business. And I'd work as a furniture mover all day long, and I'd come home and, you know, kiss my wife and check on my baby, and then I'd go sit in my corner in the little room I had, and I'd write, and I'd write a screenplay, a very bad one, I'd write a sitcom, I'd write whatever I could think I could sell, try to write, you know, dramas, comedies. Comedies seemed to come more naturally to me. I think because, as you said, you don't have to think very deeply. You didn't say that, but it is a simple format. It's a joke. There's a formula. You can get to it. And so I became, after 7 or 8 years, I finally got my first assignment. It was actually for a cartoon. It was for like Ruby Spears, Hanna-Barbera. A friend of mine was writing for them, and we got to write some cartoons. And then I finally got to write do a sitcom assignment with him. And I worked my way up. I sort of failed my way up in television for my entire career. That's what I do. I fail my way upward. But it certainly did in television because I had a facility. I was clever. I had a facility for telling jokes, a facility for taking those constraints and saying, okay, I can bring this person in here. I can twist that line. I can make that funny. And so I mean, I worked on several situation comedies until I worked my way up to executive producer after 7 or 8 years, and then was fired within the first 2 episodes because I couldn't deal with the politics of dealing with network executives and, you know, giving me contradictory notes, and I wasn't mature enough to know how to listen, to nod, go, okay, I'm going to think about that. I'd sort of point out that they made no sense. That didn't fly. I didn't learn for a while how to take notes, and I have learned now, and there's a really good way to do it. So I then got into drama accidentally. I'd written a bunch of things. Marshall Herskovitz and Ed Zwick were looking for sort of a right-hand head writer kind of. They were the showrunners for this new show called 30-something, and they were looking for somebody, and my agent submitted some of my non-sitcom stuff I'd done, and they read it, and they wanted to meet with me, and I thought they were crazy. And so I sat down with them, and they said, we've read your work, and, you know, we think that you could be good at this. I said, you do your mind? I'm a comedy writer. So I sat there in the meeting trying to convince them not to hire me. I couldn't succeed. But I was sincere in that. It wasn't a show. It was like, oh, well, it's your mistake, guys. I'd love you to do this. It's a great pilot. I'd love to be on your staff. and work with them. And that's the year that I learned how to write, by watching them, by taking their notes. I remember Marshall, I think it was Marshall, maybe it was Marshall and Dad, I can't remember, came into my office after, I had the big corner office because I was earning a lot of money, because I'd come from the sitcom. And they came into my office on the show over at the old MTM lot, which is now CBS Radford, who's probably something else now. They said, really, really good script, Paul. What's it about? What do you mean? I said, well, what's it about? Where does it come from within you? What are you trying to say? What's it mean? What's it about? And I was stumped. I didn't know. I knew that it was clever. I knew because I'd taken this character and I decided that he had fallen in love, which was the worst thing that character could possibly do, because he was a playboy. He just and I was going to make him fall in love, which was the worst thing possible. At which point he pictures himself in one Hitchcock movie after another. And then there's a plot going on because he's had an affair with a woman just to make sure that he's in love with the girl he's in love with. He decided to have sex with somebody else just to make sure and see how he felt. And that worked. He said, yes, I'm not in love with you. He opens up by saying, I'm in love. And she goes, that's so sweet. She goes, oh, no, I didn't mean with you. And so I've written this thing and it was incredibly clever, which I only later learned is death. It is cerebral, as you said. It is a game. It is a puzzle. It wasn't, even though it was based on a need, I didn't understand that and I couldn't express it. And so I couldn't just say what I just said now. It's about the need of this man who's, for the first time, he needs not to be in love, and he is, and it's a terrible thing. He just wants to go back to not being in love, but he is and can't stop that. It's a terrible thing for this man. And now he has to express that love, and then he's going to lose it at the end. I wish I could have said that, but I didn't understand it. So, but I learned in that moment, and through them, and through that year working with them, I learned so much about what writing is. So sitcom prepared me for the discipline. I could write, I could sit there, I could turn out pages, I could turn them out overnight, I could turn them out in an hour. I was incredibly disciplined. And just by the fact that you write so much, you're bound to get better. If you write thousands of words, sooner or later you can construct a sentence. It was in my case, or sooner or later you can figure out what a plot is. And so writing those on that kind of a deadline and that kind of pressure cooker that's a sitcom that you have to turn something out next week, and there's 22 episodes and you got to bang it, you can't miss a deadline. That really, really helped. And then also watching in the booth that week as the director would call the shots live and move the cameras, and just being able to sit behind the director as the writers did, because Norman allowed the writers to come in and do that. Even if you were the most junior writer, you could sit in the back and watch it and watch what worked and what didn't. And that I learned, oh, that's why he's got the camera over here, and that's how he's moving it. And John Boab was the director there, a very skilled director, and made it look very, very easy. And that was my introduction to blocking. And that was really wonderful. But yeah, I can't say I learned how to write during there. I learned discipline, and only started to get the idea of what writing was in my mid-30s, when I was able to start to ask real questions like you're asking now about characters. I know what my question for you is when you were moving from theater, at that point, when you started to think, it was probably when you adapted your play to a screenplay. What did you find the hardest in that journey from theater to screen?
Well, there were a lot of things. I mean, I was terrified because I didn't even own Final Draft. I wrote everything in Word before that. I had not been a student of screenplays, so I hadn't read very many of them. I didn't know what they looked like. I didn't know the lingo. I mean, I think a lot of the things that intimidate people that are getting into screenwriting, whenever they choose to do it, of just the superficial craftsmanship of what the page even looks like is a scary thing. And then there was the monumentality of 100 scenes. You know, I mean, any play I'd written before, prior to that, maybe in 2 acts, I might have 10 or 15 scenes total. And sometimes it was just act 1 and act 2, you know, that's it. There were no scenes. And so that felt like really big and insurmountable. And, you know, I didn't really outline my plays. I would
Really?
sort of not outline a play the way I might outline a TV show or a film. I would have a general sense of what the overall structure might be. But because it's so few scenes, I mean, it's almost like you can keep it all in your head. And then so much of it is, you know, you're writing a 20-minute scene, you're just sort of diving in and seeing where it takes you. So I had a lot of insecurity about it. I felt like I just wasn't equipped to do something that big, and yet I was going to give it a go. What I found, though, and the reason why I've so often hired playwrights on the shows that I do, is that that stuff is that you're intimidated by is you know, the architecture of it all is the easiest part in a way. The hardest thing to do is to make a scene live, and because playwrights don't have all the bells and whistles, because they have to tell the whole story in 7 scenes on one set with 4 characters. Structuring a 20-minute scene on stage is way harder than structuring 15 scenes in a movie. Because in a movie, when you know, I'll just cut it out to the next thing. I'll just, you know, use the sort of Bill Goldman rule, get in as late as possible and out as early as possible. On stage, you can't do that. Like, I mean, you could have a play that has 90 scenes, but actually the good stuff is when you keep the scene going. What can, and then what can. O'Neill is a great example of that, or Tennessee Williams, which just, it keeps going. Like in a film, you would have ended that scene 15 times already, and yet take it farther and take it farther and take it farther. So it's a much more kind of complex form of structuring that is entirely focused on human behavior. And so much of screenwriting from writers that are first starting out for film or television is paying so much attention to the visuals, right? Which, as opposed to behavior, right? This angle, and they might be cinephiles even, and think of their favorite shot from 8.5, and you know, and the camera swoops down, or they're going to easy sort of tropes in terms of what you're seeing on an actor's face and describing it, as opposed to how am I actually like justifying that behavior in the scene. And so a playwright then goes, oh great, like I actually am starting from the place of character, and now I have all these other tools available to me, you know? Whereas a screenwriter who's only done that and never written the theater, when they try to write a play, I think it's way harder because they just don't, I mean, they've never written a 20-minute scene. You know, that like, and so
that's one of the hardest things I find is getting in and loving your characters and loving the dialogue and knowing. I mean, in television, I'd written so many 5-6-page scenes. I remember writing a 3-page monologue, and for a character who was sitting and who didn't move, and was telling a story, and it's just this fabulous story this person has to tell, which is so important, so impactful, so emotional. But he's sitting in a confessional and just telling the priest, and of this great love that he had to go and he found love, the only time he fall in love, and he has to go arrest her and you know, and this epic, and then she's turning up again. And I got to the end of it, and my friends, the other producer says, you can't do that, Paul. You can't do a 3-page monologue. You can't. And I went, yeah, no, but I think I'm gonna. And so I did, because I'm the showrunner, I'm the creator, so I'm just gonna do it. And it was great, but they tell you can't do it, and especially in film. If you're working with a director, he's going to go, Paul, that's going to be really, really dull, and be what we call in the business boring. So why don't you break it into some scenes and some behavior, and let me show you I'll get a great flashback for you. I'll do this, and you're going, no, it's the words that will do it. You know, it's much more precious.
Well, there's, I mean, of course, exceptions to every rule. I mean, look at My Dinner with Andre, fascinating. 2 guys sitting at the table, or look at the film Hunger, you know, where you have a 20-minute scene with between, you know, one of the political prisoners and the priest, and it's a slow push for 20 minutes, you know,
Yeah.
and then only cuts away to close-ups in the last minute, you know, but it's just one scene, you know, and so
Riveting.
even the tricks that you would
Riveting.
use in a 3-minute monologue, we're like, well, let's get some coverage so that we can edit, and you know, you're not typically going to do that as a one.
I was
right?
one camera pushing.
Well, no, I mean that's the boldest way.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, if it's compelling enough and the behaviors or the writing's good enough, you could have a 60-minute scene in a film. You know, anything is possible. But screen time moves really fast. It tends to be more of a visual medium. You know, and you start thinking that way. Like anytime you get past 3 pages in a scene, you start getting a little nervous.
God, yeah. Your clock's going. Come on, I got only 120 pages. Gotta get it. Something I wanted to ask you. How do you know, or just let's say it's not an adaptation, because I'd love to talk about adaptations as well, because even adapting your own work, and I want to get back to Farragut North, because I did see it on stage. I did love the movie. And I want to get back to that. But how do you know when you get an original idea, when you've got it, when you have a story? How do you know you've got interesting characters? What is your own personal indicator? What's the bell that goes off that goes, oh, I've got a story now?
I wish I could say, like, you know, there's, you know, it comes to me in a dream, or it like there's, or I've, you know, there's a, you know, a little like totem or something that I consult, and you know, if like, and you know, if the light goes on, it's a real story, and if the light, you know, like a groundhog or something. But for me, it's pretty prosaic. Like I have a lot of ideas and thoughts, the way plenty of people do. You know, that I'm going through 15 thoughts a day that might be something. And sometimes, you know, I'll type in a few notes in my phone. You know, or on rare occasions, I'll even take a stab at like writing half a scene or something. But most of the time, it's just a thought or two or something, you know, or it might even come up in conversation, like the way when I was using the example of the addict who's seeking validation and yells at the woman. I mean, for all I know, 5 years from now, I'll be like, yeah, so this whole show that I did started in impromptu conversation with Paul, you know, where I talked about this person in a park, and little did I know 6 months later I would have a pilot. But what I generally do is I wait. Right, which is hard for me because I'm a pretty impatient person. I like to move quickly and I write quickly, but I wait and I say, if the idea keeps coming back to me, if I can't stop thinking about it, then maybe there's something there, and maybe it might require a little bit of research, or maybe I do write a few more scenes, but I don't push it too hard.
That's how you decide. That I love that, and I love the patience that's how you decide what to write. But I guess my question is a little different than that. Because if you're like me, as you know, there's a bunch of ideas, and there's a whole bunch I've started, and notes I've taken down, and I'm going to sit and wait on that. And sometimes they come, and sometimes I work on them for a week, 2 weeks, a month.
For me, it's months. I usually won't dive into something unless I've sat with it for 4 to 5 to 6 months.
25 drafts for me. But I'm saying before I decide to write it.
I just want to finish the thought here, because it's important I want to convey to the viewers, which is that I don't even write anything for 4 to 5 months.
Oh, interesting.
I might write, like I say, a scene or take a couple notes, but I don't actually attempt a script. Because for me, a script, at the point at which I'm going into a full-on script, whether it's a play or a screenplay or a pilot or what have you, it's a serious commitment where I have to believe that I'm going to throw everything into it. It'll be the only focus of my entire existence in order to, and this comes from not having a natural talent. Like, I know I'm going to have to make that commitment and work really hard. So I really want to feel like I know what I'm doing, and not necessarily that I know everything will happen or how it will end or I've got everything figured out, but that enough thought and marination and consideration and understanding of, like, at least the scope of the complexity of the story is in my bones, that when I sit down to write, it will be real and not just kind of flitting around and exploratory. Because I also know this about myself, I write quickly. I mean, I will typically write a play in 2 weeks.
Wow.
You know, pilot in a week or less.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
write
for a draft. I have to barrel through it, but I can only barrel through it and have that energy if I've spent 6 months with it prior.
I'm similar. Well, I guess I will keep at that and keep at that and think. I mean, Crash was a year of research and reading and talking and thinking, and then script was 2 weeks. It would just, I didn't, it's a lot of notes.
Well, then it's another year of rewriting, you know? So that
exactly.
one initial sort of fulcrum moment of going from all the preparation to that in pure instinct informed by years of craft into a draft that is vibrating with
and 25 drafts later it works. I know that's with me.
And you got to pull back and say, now I'm going to, in a much more sort of measured, objective, and patient, you got to find your patience again and go, I'm going to methodically go through 15 drafts of this to make it actually good.
With me, the answer is a little easier. I don't say, ooh, I've got something, until I know what the great sort of moral crisis is for the person near the end of the movie, you know, sometime in Act 3. When I know, oh my God, I could never, I don't necessarily know how they're going to answer it. I don't know if they're going to win or lose. I don't know if they are going to come up victorious. But I know that there's a question near the end of the movie somewhere that I cannot answer. There's 2 things that I go, oh my God, there's a choice here. What would I do? And it's something that fascinates me, and is in fact and haunts me. So that at that point I go, okay, I've got that moral quandary. I've got that impossible question in which I just don't want to be in the room. I don't want to anywhere near that thing. And I go, oh, now I can write this. Now I want to write this, or rather, because as interesting as my characters are up to that point, as fascinating as the research is, as all that stuff, I don't, until the question becomes visceral to me. And I go, ooh, I've got, you know, with $1 Million Baby, what do you do? With the woman you love is asking you to kill her. And if you do kill her, you'll lose your immortal soul. And if you don't kill her, you're betraying her. And it's like, oh, that's impossible. I don't want to be in that decision. I can't be there. Let me out of the room. And then I know, as soon as I want to flee, that I have something to write about. And that could be a year, that could be 6 months, that could come immediately. I still think about it a lot, but it usually takes a long time, a lot of thinking, reading, talking, to get me to that point where I go, oh, that's too uncommon. And that's even in a comedy. It's the same. But I didn't know if you had one thing with me, and I think probably because I'm fixated on that, I don't write as much as I should, because I keep looking for that, and I should just jump in and explore it more and find it, which often happens. I often find those things if I give myself the ability to just explore it more. You know, I will come to that, rather than being so rigid in my belief that I should find that before I start typing.
I don't know. I mean, there's no one formula, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. It's interesting. I don't think I'm searching for that thing the same way you are, of like, what is the
No, it seems much more organic the way you do it.
We have to arrive at. For me, not every story propels itself towards a moment of like moral crisis per se.
Yeah.
I think every story, if it's has any value, whether it's a comedy, a drama, a TV show, a film, a play, what have you, has to be about something, and you need to know what it's about. You might not know how you fully feel about that or what you'll discover about it, but you do need to know, have some sense of what you're trying to say, or what you're trying to explore.
What you're trying to explore, yeah. With the questions you want to ask.
And so that story you brought up about your colleagues at 30-something, you go, yeah, but what's this about? I mean, what I do need to know is, what is it about? And in terms of the characters I'm really following, what do they need? And have those 2 things playing in one another. And then having arrived at those 2 things, is the story necessary? Do I actually feel it's necessary? There's too much art in the world. There's like a lot of bad art. And there's a lot of very talented people who are not given the opportunities to make great art, right? So you have to ask yourself, is this particular story, I mean, being an artist is an act of selfishness in one regard. Like the first person you're trying to please is yourself. What am I interested in? What do I care about? What do I feel is necessary? And if it feels necessary to you, maybe that's enough. But I also do think about, like, how necessary is this to the world, this story, you know? Like, because, you know, it's a paradox. On the one hand, like, we have to convince ourselves the audience doesn't matter, right? Like, you don't want to pander to them. You don't
right for the audience. Exactly.
No one knows how the world will think about what you're trying to communicate. And you're putting yourself in a position of, I have something to communicate to you. And it's a one-way street. You're not necessarily communicating back to me. So there's that, which is, you know, you're in yourself looking outwards and trying to blind yourself to, like, what are all the things the critics might say or how this might be received. You know, I need to focus on this. But you are engaging in a process where in success, your hope is to actually reach people. You know, not to make a film that only you watch. You know, you want a lot of people to watch it, or if not a lot of people, at least some people. You know, you want to communicate. So I do think there's a stage at which you think, well, who am I trying to communicate to? You know, and what do I want them to experience and feel, or be confused about and explore, and is that a valuable thing?
Yeah, that was my first film, was the questions I kept asking that I couldn't answer myself. And I didn't have the moral crisis. I didn't have that. I just had a gnawing question that I couldn't answer myself. And so I explored that through every single character. Is that what is that? And so what's it about? That question became, you know, the most important thing. I had no answers. I didn't know how to answer these questions, or, you know, any of these questions, because they were things that haunted me. I didn't know about myself and therefore others. Can we get back to the Ides of March for a second? Because when you were talking about, you have your play, and which I had seen, and I just when you then, but after seeing your film, which is, I guess, I don't know if this is going to be a compliment or not. After seeing it, I can't remember the play, because it created entirely, the world was one which seems so specifically a film. Even though, and which is a very rare thing in coming from a play. You know, how did you do that? How did you completely think it?
I mean, first of all, most of the credit goes to George Clooney for everything having to do with that film. And that goes from the script to casting it, to financing it, to directing it, to producing it. That film would not have been made if it wasn't for him. And there are 3 names for the script. It's written not just by me, but also by George and his producing partner, Grant Heslov. And a lot of the work you're seeing, I would say the lion's share of the work you're seeing on the screen in terms of new material is theirs. The way that process worked is I worked on a couple of drafts adapting the play, and they were kind of exploratory and trying different things, and then arrived at, okay, here's a version of it. And then they took that draft and they went to work and made a ton of changes, and some stuff threw out wholesale. And then other aspects of the play that I myself had gotten rid of, they brought back in word for word from the play itself. So it wasn't like a process where the 3 of us were sitting in a room breaking story and then divvying up who's writing that scene or taking passes. It was in stages, you know, and George knew he was going to direct the film. So he was crafting the screenplay towards what he intended to direct. So, you know, I mean, one of the things about the play is that, you know, the story, which always focused on Stephen Morris, in New York, that was John Gallagher Jr. on the stage at the Atlantic Theater Company, and in LA at the Geffen, it was Chris Pine, who just before as he was getting super famous from Star Trek. In the movie, it's Ryan Gosling. That was the protagonist always. And the one thing that I always knew that George and Grant were going to do, and we talked about this beforehand, and why I felt comfortable completely like placing this in their hands, is that this was a story about the moment someone turns into a monster, which doesn't happen overnight, but happens in gradations. And so you have this young man who has more power at his fingertips than he probably is prepared for emotionally or in terms of maturity, who's super smart and capable, who is no saint, is you know, is not an innocent person coming into the movie, but it's still probably a little bit more on the idealistic side of the spectrum than on the completely self-serving side. And what is that moment in which he crosses over? And so the whole story is, you know, how does Jared Kushner become Jared Kushner, right? Like in a way, you know, or there's countless examples of someone that started off one way and became another way.
It's incredible.
The moment that this protagonist goes over to the dark side, the movie's over or the play's over, right?
Yeah.
So the whole play is the justification of, or the mapping of what leads up to that moment, right? Yeah. And so that was always going to be the story, but in the
and
play,
you're hoping, I mean, when you get to that, that's the question in me, as you said, when you're hoping and hoping and hoping when watching the play, and the thing that she's going to get there and go, okay, no way, God, no, that's it. Mr. Smith goes to Washington. I will never do that. I'll never cross that line. And that's what the audience, that's the tension that's so beautiful in that.
So that was always going to be at the core of it. Then there was significant changes in terms of story. Part of it having to do with the film is bigger, so you have more characters. You know, the entire play was 7 scenes set in like 3 locations. And like the governor, which is the role that Clooney played in the movie, never appeared on stage. I mean, the governor was just spoken about. This was very behind the scenes. And so the main sort of antagonist in a way was, antagonism became between Stephen and the campaign manager, Paul Zara, in the play. Now that was Phil Hoffman's role in the movie. But you're introduced the element of the governor as a character, and that completely changes the dynamic, of course. And then there's also, you know, I don't believe that this, like the whole 3-act structure for movies, like, you know, that's taught in a lot of schools, like in First and Second Incident by Page of Them, the 3-act structure. You know, some movies are 3 acts, some movies are 1 act, some movies are 7 acts. You know, like whatever the story.
It's a good way to think about it. You have to structure it somehow, so it's a good way this happens. But where it happens, I mean, I was impressed by a writing teacher who I was listening to, because I like to listen to these people, and you know, Corey, and he said, you know, he'd read a script, and I went, oh my God, I've got a 50-page act 1. He went, so is it compelling? Is it on your, you know, is it? And he said, yeah, it's fine. Forget all the rules, and I really appreciated that. So the
reason I bring that up is because the play was 2 acts, and I would say that the movie kind of needed to be 3 acts in a way. The ending of the movie and how you get there over that expanse of time in the play wasn't like a film ending. You know, in film, time moves much faster, so you can kind of cover the narrative ground of the play in half as much the time when it came to the film. And then you've introduced these other elements that change the dynamic. So it required almost like, taking the story further in order to get to the same place, which is the moment that someone, you know, turns into being a monster. And so that, you know, over time resulted in significant divergences from the play, but the core story remained, and that's all that mattered to me.
Beautiful. I mean, yeah, because I saw it at the GIF, and I remember and I forgot it was Chris. That was interesting. Yeah, and it's also, I mean, people ask me about what's the story structure. They admire the story structure for Crash, and I probably incorrectly say it's only in Act 2. It's just Act 2. That's all it is. People start at this crisis where you would normally have them at the end of Act 1, and then I end it. The idea was to end it, let them glimpse who they are, but don't have them make any decisions, don't have them make any changes in their life, don't have them go through what normally would in Act 3 and then come out victorious. No, they just glimpse themselves. That's all I care about. And so I could be wrong, but it's just 1 act. And it's the middle one, you know, it's like not even the one you should be doing. So, so that I find is fascinating. The rules that we have, that we, you know, they're good to sit down and go, okay.
Yeah, it's like take a movie like Heat, where you have like an hour and 40-minute first act, and like a 10-minute second act, and that's the movie.
Yeah.
You know, like if you start applying
The
these,
build-up. But
you know,
someone's going to argue, these people who actually teach this shit and know what they're doing, which is why I've never taught writing, because I don't know how to teach it. I'm just going to screw everybody up. But will argue with us and tell us why we're both wrong. And
Sure.
if I've had people do that, great, because it's why that's 3x, why crash is in fact 3x, why your play, even though it's 2x, is 4x.
That stuff's interesting to go back and sort of reverse engineer a movie, and you can try to apply these structures to it. That may lead to an interesting conversation. But where I think it can become damaging and limiting is when you're starting from that formulaic structural place.
Yes.
You know, and you have these books that are telling you, here's your checklist for the things you do to write a good screenplay. Because, you know, the moment you introduce formula is the moment that you start killing creativity and innovation. And are there tricks like axioms and things you learn along the way? Absolutely. Like a great one that I think about all the time is get in late, get out early.
Yeah, really cool. I can't get back to that.
Every rule, and that's just speaking to that screen time moves fast, and usually you're overwriting, you know, in terms of what you need. So it's like, you know, presupposing just getting to the editing room and, you know, leaving a lot of celluloid on the floor.
Yeah.
Figuratively. But that rule should absolutely be broken if you keep writing that scene and then, oh, it's going too long. I should have gotten out a page ago. I should have gotten out 2 pages ago. Wait, now I've actually arrived at a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And the scene has become like exalted and transformative, and I've unlocked something because I let it go 5 pages. So fuck that rule, you know?
Yeah. And I've done that too, and sometimes I've gone through and I've written. I started at that moment where I thought was late in the scene, and I wrote it, and I just let it twist, and I let it twist, and let it twist, and I come back, and out of the 12-page scene, I cut the first 10 pages. Because I finally got to what I wanted to write about. You know, in the last 2 pages, I finally.
It's like the late great David Carr, the media reporter from the New York Times, who is a friend. He had a saying that I put up on my wall, and every time I'm in the writer's room,
write the character.
Keep typing until it turns into writing.
That's great. Absolutely the truth. That's absolutely the truth. Because a lot of time, as I was talking about my career for a long time, I made a very good living as a very bad writer for a long time because I was just typing, you know. And at some point, many years into my career, I learned what writing was, and then only now I learned how to write.
But you still the actual muscle memory of your fingers, that keyboard, and just the act of doing it, and the we talked a lot about thinking about something for 6 months, but I don't want to be misleading there. Like that doesn't mean that you're not writing for 6 months. It means you're not writing that thing for 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That's in the back of your head. You're writing
during those 6 months. So you know, you're thinking about that thing you might be writing 6 months from now, but meanwhile, be writing something. Because the only real piece of concrete advice you can give anyone is that you have to write thousands of pages. That's it. Like beyond that, everyone has their own style, and there's no like, it's better to work in the morning as opposed to evening, or have a schedule, or read that book, or da-da-da.
John Logan, remember, he told me he used to write starting at 4 o'clock in the morning, sitting in his bathtub, and he writes from like 4 or 5 in the morning till noon in his bathtub. Now he could have been just taking the piss out of me, but writes in the morning, and that's it. Does it? And I went, wow, how do you do that? It's so fascinating how each writer has their own particular way, and everyone wants to know, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what works for you or works for me. It's just what works for that individual person. Maybe they start at midnight and they work till 6. But I used to do that a lot when I was because
I have found generally what's true of all of the writers that are good and have accomplished something is that whether it was in the tub or sitting on a subway train or with their particular type of 1957 typewriter, or someone who's doing it by longhand, or someone who needs to smoke a joint, first, whatever. There's all of them writing a shit ton of pages.
Yeah, and
most of them are bad.
Yeah,
almost
all of them are bad.
I certainly don't think I've gotten any. I've not become a better writer over time. I don't know if you can become a better writer. I think you can become a better observer, and by that I mean more efficient observer. And I also think you can get better at knowing when you're writing badly quicker. So you become a little more efficient. Like you're able, your muscle of self-reflection in a way that is able to push self-loathing over here and push overinflated ego over here and say, okay, let me look at this thing. Is it good or bad? This is pretty bad. I need to toss it. I need to start it over, or it's not worth my time, or I'll come back to it in 2 weeks. I think you get better at that. So it makes it seem like you're writing better, you know, because maybe the ratio of bad pages to good pages is a little bit smaller.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's it. That just comes from doing it constantly.
Yeah, and I think I once said this, that I realized I was a pretty decent writer when about 40% of my work on a page was pretty damn good, pretty compelling.
40? I call bullshit. There's no 40. No one bats 400, man.
Okay, 10%. No, but there was a small percentage. No, I'm really, really good. So a small percentage of it was good. What the corollary is, well, that other 60, 70, 80% is bad. And you have to know that. And that's what, especially when you're on the stage, you have to know, oh yes, those were just words I was putting in to try and explain what I was talking about, but please cut them out and do them in a look, because you'll make me look so much better. You know, to be pithy, and the fewer words, the more expression. Please, we love actors to take out our words, except when they don't know what they're doing, and then they take out the wrong words. And you go, no, that's the essence of the scene. You have to do that moment. Sorry, I know. Take out all the other words. That one you got to keep, which happens occasionally. I mean, yeah, I guess that's it. Right. Find a way to get in that chair and do it for hours. And that's the most uncomfortable thing. It's the thing we all want to escape from, is that chair, and you know that just sitting there. And whether it's a blank page or you've got hundreds of pages in front of you that are crappy, it's just, or great, or whatever they are. It's just so damn hard. And that discipline alone, I think, is what makes a writer. That discipline, that ability to sit there and not get up, or get up and pace and get back down, just to come back to it and just put the time in, is the difference between, you know, what makes a writer and what makes a person who wants to write. And a lot of people want to write.
On that note, Paul, I mean, we've now given our writers who are watching over an hour of procrastination.
I just wanted to say that.
Not writing. Yeah. And maybe we should give them the opportunity.
I was about to end this, and I thought, no, I'll let you. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you so much, Beau, for your time and your insights.
Thank you so much.
I've learned some things. I've been taking notes, not largely about things I have to change and do and stress in my writing and stuff. So I've learned so much from you. Thank you, Beau.
As have I. And Mark, thank you again.
Thank you, Beau.
I hope to make it out to Berlin sometime in this decade.
And let's do this again.
Oh, hopefully soon. Hopefully soon. It would be great to do it at the next one, next year or the next.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much for your time. Paul, thank you so much for initiating this, and all the best.
Talk to you soon, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.